Pt.3, over to you.
Enchanté. I'm supposed to sit down here.
A one-on-one conversation is set up to hear the young president speak about his affinity with the Africa Shrine.
Nous sommes très heureux de vous avoir ce soir. Now,
President Macron describes the Afrobeat Club as an iconic center for the propagation of African culture, strength and music.
But I think that we discussed with the governor, in this state, in this city, 2/3 of the population is under 35, which means that 2/3, at least, of your people just never experienced colonization. And it's true for a large part of Africa. You have to recognize the bad and the negative pages of this history. And you have to recognize all the past deeds and face them. But you have to move forward. And if you are always polluted by this certain vision, you never move forward.
The French leader is more concerned about the massive migration of Africans to Europe. Migration from sub-Saharan Africa to European nations has grown since 2010, with thousands of deaths recorded in the risky journeys on the sea and by land. Many flee violence, lack of job opportunities, poor economy and bad governance in their nations.
I'm not so sure that the image is always negative. But we are a little bit always paradoxical when we speak about Africa. Some people say, this is a tremendous continent. This is a unique place with young people with a lot of opportunities and blah, blah, and blah, blah, and blah, blah. And at the same time, a lot of people say Africa is a place of terrorism, the origins of migration, and so on. And probably these two messages are true at the same time. Because Africa is just more than that. This is a living continent, a young continent. And where I do believe it's possible to change all this negative message is just because what we need is to have African people speaking about Africa. It's to change this relation. European leaders are not here to lecture African leaders. African leaders are here to take care of their people. And none of us are here to leave the young generation to believe one second, that their future is outside Africa. They have to build their future here in Africa, and we have to help them.
absolutely.
He announces the launch of the 2020 African Culture Season in France, which is expected to help create a unique face for African culture in Europe.
We decided to organize everywhere in France for 2020 a series of events about African culture. But the new thing is that it will be for Africa, for African artists, by African artists, and with African leaders, business community, influencers, and African people. What does it mean? Is that first, we appointed a Franco-Senegalese curator, Mrs. Fall, and she is here with us, and thanks very much. And her team is made by a series of young curators coming from all over the place in Africa. You will have contemporary artists, painters, people involved in fashion, in movie, visual arts, architecture, all the different arts existing and present in Africa and especially in Nigeria. It will be about the new generation of artists coming from Africa. It will be organized by them and for them in order to show to France and Europe what it means, and not to provide, always the same visage, the same figure of Africa. And it will be financed and organized by African leaders. all these events will be financed by African business.
Perhaps 11-year-old Karim Olamilekon has begun changing the Nigerian narrative by showcasing his artistic prowess. Karim draws a portrait of President Macron in just 2 hours.
Our founder and chairman, Mr. Tony Elumelu.
President Macron arrives at an open forum on the instance of the Tony Elumelu Foundation. He chats with over 2,000 young entrepreneurs.
Nobody has to decide for our future. We are the one to decide. Nobody has to lecture us, which means that we have to take our responsibility. Think about the legacy, the sustainability of our deeds, and how we share, how we develop our countries. And we can revert on that, obviously, during the discussion. But this new narrative is just to say Africa is the one to decide for Africa, to explain about Africa, and to create its own model of entrepreneurship, but its own culture, and to explain it to the rest of the world. And not just to be part of a globalization whose adjustments were always made despite of people in a certain way. So this new narrative is to be built now. And I do believe it's your responsibility. And I do believe it's good for Africa and it's good for France. Because if Africa doesn't succeed, France and Europe will never succeed on the long run. For 2 very simple reasons. Europe is not an island, and all this migration crisis, and we can revert on it if you want, is exactly due to the fact that we have a common destiny. And second, because we have a very important African diaspora in France, in the rest of Europe, and they cannot live and develop themselves and succeed in France or in Europe if in their country people don't succeed. That's this new narrative, and it was my first message. The second one is that entrepreneurship and innovation is part of the answer. It's part of the answer because that's the best way to access to responsibility and to change everything when you are young and you want to do it. Innovation is just about change. Smart people, when they are in charge, are obsessed by innovation because they want to reinvent themselves.
The French leader signs a development finance agreement of €1 billion with the Foundation for Development Finance and Entrepreneurship in Africa, challenging Nigeria's youth population to unlock the economic potential of Africa. The founder of the Tony Elumelu Foundation believes African entrepreneurs hold the key to the continent's transformation.
Entrepreneurship, entrepreneurs, and those they inspire are the lifeblood of Africa's transformation. And you share this too. And that is why the Tony Elumelu Foundation decided to support young Africans with $100 million over a period of 10 years to create 10,000 African entrepreneurs. We've done 4,000, we have 6,000 to go. And we believe, and we speak to our friends, that it takes 2 things. These young Africans are ready to succeed. And they realize that their success is not just for themselves, but for the entire community. We need our government to prioritize them. And we also need some of us in the private sector to realize that they need, just as we had, democratization of luck, access to opportunities. They need all of us to support them, and they need us to invest in their future so that collectively all of us can make Africa great. I say to my colleagues and also friends that we are not defined by the resources of the bank account that we have, balances we have in our bank accounts. What defines us ultimately is the kind of impact on humanity that we're able to make, the kind of legacy that we leave in turning lives.
Mr. Macron ends his two-day visit to Nigeria, leaving the country to rethink its future.